Same laptop, the same piece of arithmetic, run on two different chips, sitting a few centimeters apart on the same board. The processor manages about 293 billion operations a second. The graphics chip does 4,100 billion, 14 times more work in the same second on the same machine. The obvious explanation is that the graphics chip is simply faster. It isn't. By the measure most people mean by faster, it loses. Each core inside the processor runs at up to 4.4 gigahertz. Each core inside the graphics chip runs at 1.5. Per core, the processor is nearly 3 times quicker. So the slower chip wins by 14 times. Whatever is going on here, it is not speed. 3 things explain it, and the third one is the reason your chatbot still feels slow. Every number in this video was measured on this laptop today, or comes from a named spec sheet. Where I'm interpreting rather than measuring, the screen says so. Start with the thing the clock speed hides. The processor has 8 cores. The graphics chip has 16 processing units, and each one holds 128 arithmetic lanes, 2,048 of them in total. Those lanes are not equivalent to processor cores. Each one is far simpler and far more limited. That is exactly the trade. Give up cleverness per core, buy enormous numbers of them. But with only means anything if the work can actually be split up. So I measured that directly on the processor by giving the same job more and more cores. 1 core, 80 billion operations a second. 2 cores, 177. 4 cores, 268. Splitting the work does pay. And then it stops. 8 cores and 12 cores are no better than 4. The likely reason is that half this processor's cores are small efficiency cores, and a shared job runs at the pace of its slowest worker. I did not instrument that directly, so treat it as the likely cause, not a proven one. 3 times faster, and that is what 12 cores bought. The graphics chip is playing the same game with 2,000. Which raises the real question. Why does this particular job split so well? Almost everything a neural network does reduces to one operation. Take a grid of numbers, multiply it by another grid of numbers. That's it. That is the machine. Here's what that means. Each cell of the answer is worked out from a row of the first grid and a column of the second. Look at what's missing. No cell of the answer depends on any other cell of the answer. For the multiply I measured, that's about 4 million cells. For million small calculations that never have to wait for each other, never have to agree on anything, and can happen in any order at all. That is the only reason 2,000 simple lanes can beat 8 clever ones. Hand a graphics chip a job that has to happen in order, and it is the slower machine again. And this is the accident at the center of the story. Drawing graphics is the same bargain. Millions of pixels, each shaded by a small calculation, none of them waiting on the others. The hardware was built for triangles. Nobody designed these chips for neural networks. The shape of the maths just happened to match. I should be fair though. The software ecosystem that grew around these chips mattered enormously too. The hardware didn't win on its own. Which brings us to the obvious objection. If this chip is 14 times better, why is anything still running on the processor? Because that 14 times only counted the arithmetic. It quietly assumed the numbers were already sitting on the graphics chip. Real code has to send them there and bring the answer back. So I timed the whole round trip. Copy the data across, do the multiply, copy the answer back. Not just the middle step. And the answer flips. Below about 1,000 by 1,000, the processor wins outright. The graphics chip is the slower option. Above that, it pulls away. Look at where the time goes even when it wins. At 2,000 by 2,000, the whole job takes about 29 milliseconds. 24 of those are spent moving the numbers. Only 5 are spent multiplying them. 82% of the time is traffic. The arithmetic, the thing we spent the whole video admiring, was never the expensive part. Which turns this into a story about memory, and about 2 walls you hit long before you run out of arithmetic. Here is the first wall. The graphics chip reads its own memory at about 160 gigabytes a second. The processor manages 12. That gap is 13 times, and it matters more than the arithmetic gap. And the connection between the two chips runs at 12.6 gigabytes a second, roughly the speed of the processor's own memory, and 13 times slower than the graphics chips. That connection is why small jobs lose. Which gives you the rule that shapes all of this. Get the data onto the chip, then leave it there and do as much as you possibly can before bringing anything back. Then there is the second wall, and it is a harder one. This card has 4 gigabytes of memory. 3.45 are actually available. I found the real ceiling by asking for bigger and bigger blocks until it refused. 3,584 megabytes. At full precision, that holds about 860 million parameters. Have the precision, and you get 1.7 billion. Squeeze to 8 bits, and about 3.5 billion. And that is weights only. It doesn't include the working memory a model needs while it runs, or the growing record of your conversation. The real limit is lower. That record is its own video, and it's the next one. This is why the arguments in this industry are about memory and interconnects, and almost never about clock speed. The arithmetic stopped being the bottleneck a long time ago. Before the answer, the part most videos skip. This is a 70-watt laptop graphics chip. It is not the hardware that trains real models, and I have not measured that hardware. The shape of every curve here transfers. None of the absolute numbers do. One more piece of honesty. I ran the headline test 5 times on each chip. The graphics chip's slowest run was within 1% of its fastest. The processors varied by 56%, purely with how warm the laptop had become. So the honest headline is not 14 times. It's somewhere between 12 and 20, depending on how hot this laptop is. I'm showing you the range because the range is the measurement. So, back to the question. Graphics chips did not win because they are fast. Per core they are slower, they hold a fraction of the memory, and everything you want to compute has to be shipped across a narrow connection first. They won because the central operation of modern AI turned out to be millions of tiny sums that don't need each other, which is precisely and accidentally what a chip built for drawing pictures already was. The hardware didn't adapt to the idea. The idea found hardware that was already waiting. If you want to know what happens when that 4 gigabytes runs out, that's the next video. Thanks for watching.